Omicron na nangyari sa atin. Kaya siyempre nakabantay tayo and hopefully yung ating border control, yung negative PCR test para sa mga dayuhan na bibisita sa Pilipinas ay maging sapat sa pag-prevent ng pagpasok ng Omicron XE.
The research group clarifies that there's no assurance that the Philippines will experience a new surge in COVID-19 cases. The research fellow Guido David explained that we can avoid another surge if we continue to follow health protocols.
Baka ma-prevent natin itong sinasabi ng WHO na magkaka-surge. Pero kung hindi tayo mag-iingat, posible mangyari talaga yan kung hindi tayo sumusunod sa health protocols.
More than 66 million Filipinos have been fully vaccinated against the COVID-19 virus, including 10 million children and youth. More than 12 million have also received their booster shots. But the pandemic is not over, and scientists continue to watch out for strains and variants. Is the Philippines ready in case the pandemic changes for something even worse? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. We'll be joined by our guests and the other chiefs when we return. Welcome to the Chiefs. Ako po si Robbie Alampay. Kasama po natin online. Nasa Maynila po, Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star. Sa Quezon City, si Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5. And dito po sa Mandaluyong, Ed Lingao of One News. Chiefs, happy Monday.
Hello, good evening.
Happy Holy Week.
Happy Monday sa sa Visayas and parts of Mindanao.
Oo nga.
Yeah, matindi yung
Happy Holy Monday. Holy
Oo.
Monday, no? Tama ba?
matindi yung binabantayan natin na baha doon. Kanina panay-round up natin na mga baha, mga nasalanta. And we're still bracing for a couple more elements dito sa, it's more than one.
Yeah, but
weather.
the second one is just going to pass through the PAR. It's not going to hit to do landfall. But
Yeah.
this agaton kasi, mahina siya, but it's more or less stationary. So hindi gumagalaw, so it's dumping rain all over Visayas. So you have super saturated soil, kaya nagla-landslide.
Tsaka hindi ko naman naiintindihan lahat yan. Pero all I know is, kahit tumama o hindi, these different systems are affecting each other.
Yeah.
Diba? And all of that are complicating not just the situation, but even the projections for what might happen. Anyway, sige, tonight we'll still talk about COVID. We are also monitoring that. Joining us is Dr. Nina Gloriani, the chairperson of the Vaccine Expert Panel. Good evening and welcome back to the Chiefs, Dr. Gloriani.
Good evening, Dr. Gloriani.
Eugene, Ami.
Gandang gabi po. Long time no see.
And of course, Dr. Gloriani, timely pa rin ang pagbisita nyo ulit dito. As you know, we are already in the Holy Week. So nag-uuwian, and even before this, nag-gathering na yung mga tao. And then, dire-diretso na yan. We're all heading into the elections. Now, ibato ko na lahat ng mga minamatsagan at sinusubukan namin intindihin. May bagong variant, may warning ang WHO, bakunado tayo, pero there's talk about waning efficacy and so on. If you take all of that, ano pong sitwasyon na nakikita nyo?
Okay. Sa ngayon, we were happy that the cases of COVID have gone down considerably and continue to come down. But we are seeing a lot of cases sa neighbors natin. We know that. Hindi lang tens, 20, hundreds of thousands of cases per day in some of these countries. So there is that threat, continuing threat of the emerging variants, and right now we have yung XE nga. So sa ngayon, we don't have XE here as per yung ating Philippine Genome Center and the DOH, but we have to continue to watch out for that. Why? You know that Omicron has higher transmissibility, and although they are saying na hindi naman 10 times yung transmissibility ng XE, but 10%.
Okay.
10% more.
10%.
Not 10 times or
Okay.
So one plus
Consuelo de Bobo.
parang ganon. But still,
Pakitweet nga po, pakitweet. It's not 10 times, it's only 10% more.
10% per
That's a
the
huge
week.
difference.
Pero we still have to be careful, right now, what we know about XE is it has around 3 unique mutations dahil nag-combine si BA1 and BA2. It's a recombinant virus. So, but we still do not know the effects of these 3 mutations sa behavior niya or sa properties niya. So right now may konting increase in transmissibility, but we do not know kung mayroong increase in severity or decrease in severity or even higher immune escape from the first generation vaccines. We do not know that yet. We still have to monitor.
Doc, even with all the shots we've taken, and with some of the boosters that some of us have taken, and some of the natural immunity that a lot of people may have acquired because of infection, yung 10%, that's from the baseline, or that's from the present situation?
The present situation ito. Oo. Now, with regards to yung boosters, ano na nga yung ano mo?
We have 12 million boosted already, and then
Yes,
I
yes.
suppose you have so many million people who were infected with Omicron, so they have
So-
natural immunity for a while at least.
Two things. We have those who were infected and
Opo.
were not vaccinated, and those who were infected and vaccinated.
Yes, ma'am.
Between the two, we have hybrid immunity, which is better. So yung better means they have natural immunity plus the effects of the vaccination. So usually higher neutralizing antibodies yan and also broader ang protection niya against the variants. So parang may advantage yung nagkaroon ng previous infection, although we do
Okay.
not actually want people to get the infection para lang magkaroon ng hybrid immunity. But for those who receive the vaccines lang, no, hindi sila nagka-infection, we have shown, or we have data have shown that 2 doses are not enough to protect against especially severe form and the variants of concern. And there are a lot of data now that show that 3 doses are needed. 3 doses for the 2-dose series. So, I don't know, yung sa 1 dose, ito yung Janssen lang at meron tayong Sputnik Light ngayon. No? We continue to advocate na dapat 2 doses din lahat ng yan. But of course, they were given EUA for a single dose. So we think a 3rd dose is really critical. And in fact, we may be offered the 2nd booster already in the next few days or few weeks.
Ay, ma'am,
Meron
so
ng
ma'am,
recommendation.
did I hear you right? Yung the shots that were only required to be given once, like Sputnik Light and I think it was Janssen. Your recommendation is actually to have 2 doses for a full dose?
Actually, our initial studies showed they submitted data on 2 doses. Kaya lang ang application was for 1 dose,
Opo.
especially J&J. But we saw data for 2 doses were higher. So we said at that time there were not enough vaccine supplies. So
Okay.
because the application was for 1 dose, pero now we have so many supplies, so
Yeah, we have so
much. Nag-expire na nga yung iba, no? I think we should go for 2 doses even for those vaccines.
So yung mga nag-Janssen and Sputnik Light, you're recommending an additional dose now, tama ba?
Now.
Is that correct?
Yes.
That now,
Yes.
hindi sapat yung isa lang.
Although it's up to the NVOC, our government, to actually decide on that. Kasi EUA nga niya is only for 1. But we would prefer a 2nd dose for those.
So what would be the ideal tawag dyan, timetable or schedule for boostering? Kasi parang, di ba, I mean, we're always talking about waning efficacy. And you wonder whether those who had been boosted last year, as early as last year, may have already
Pasuna.
weaker immunity, vaccine strength now,
Yeah.
by now, no? So, ano ba
That's
talaga
true.
dapat yan?
The first booster doses were administered November
Yeah.
2021.
Right.
So, ibig sabihin, no, that's how many months na? 5 na,
Yes.
no? 4,
Yeah.
5. So, actually, kasama ako doon. So, our recommendation is to give the 2nd booster to special populations, hindi naman for the general healthy population. At least 4 months after the last booster or the last dose. So at
4
least
months.
4 months. And that includes the immunocompromised, the elderly, and those who are highly vulnerable or at highest risk for COVID, severe COVID, and yung mataas ang exposure to possible COVID positive people. Sino
Paano yung mga hindi nagpa-booster man lang?
they
Parang
should
wala
get-
na ba yun? Wala na.
No, they
Kumbaga,
should still get that 3rd dose. Sana.
Yeah.
Pwede naman. There are data to show na pwede naman ang booster given 6 months, 9 months later. In fact, for the younger population, mas mataas yung antibody response kapag longer yung interval. Pero because of the variants of concern, especially Omicron, we had to shorten that interval. Actually, yun ang naging basis, yung variants. Dapat sana mas mahaba. Pero iniklian natin kasi WHO has also announced that all of these viruses, ito tuloy-tuloy lang naman kasi ang mutation ng mga viruses, random yan eh. So, every month, every 4 months, they are actually sort of expecting surges or different variants emerging.
So yung mga nagpabakuna nung June, wala nang effect ngayon, yung bakuna. Tama ba yun?
Matagal na yon, kaya nga.
Yes, wala na yun. Kumbaga, they're now back to
No, we do
zero.
not know.
in
Some
terms of
people will have very
vulnerability.
good immunity that will last long. But generally, bumababa siya by 4, 5, 6 months. Yun ang general. Siyempre, parati tayong may exceptions. At lalo yung may mga sakit, may immunocompromised conditions, they will wane faster. Kaya binabantayan natin sila.
Doktor, nabanggit nyo kanina, third dose. Ilang booster, no? You mean a full dose? Kasi yung sa Moderna, half dose lang yung binibigay nila for the booster. Yung third dose, are you talking about a full dose? For, for the two brands na ginagamit natin for booster?
Only Moderna reduced its dose to half. They were able to provide data that kasi for to reduce also the side effects, di ba? Mataas ang side effects yan sa mRNA vaccines. So they tried using 50 versus 100 micrograms, the usual dose. And they showed the same lang ang response of 50. That's why they were able to reduce that. So that's why we actually approved that. Kasi nga pareho lang yung levels ng antibodies.
Pero yung Pfizer and AstraZeneca, full dose.
Full dose sila, hindi nila change yun.
So, paano yung nagpa-Moderna ng booster? Yung fourth dose nila kung sakasakala is a half dose as well?
For Moderna, yes. That's what we're giving for boosters for Moderna now. Ito yung EUA nila, amendment to their EUA.
Doc, nabanggit nyo kanina yung other Asian countries, even yung mga neighbors natin in Southeast Asia, nag-surge sila. And as you pointed out, in some countries, hindi lang tens of thousands. Sa South Korea, humampas sa hundreds of thousands nung a few weeks back. What's happening in those countries? Keeping in mind na kasi dati pagka nakita natin may nag-surge sa isang bansa, after a couple of weeks, parang humahabol din tayo. Meron din ano. What's different there, if at all, if it is in fact different, and what does that necessarily tell or maybe not necessarily tell us?
I think yung easing of restrictions, mga unmasking, gathering, I think that to a certain extent, tayo may naging problem there, but generally speaking, and I am rather proud of that, when I talked with somebody from the US who came here and saw how parang many of the Filipinos are wearing masks, and properly compared to their American counterparts. Parang, siguro, baka yun yung nangyari sa ibang countries. Nag-ease sila too much or too early. But tayo, we have maintained that. And of course, pataas yung coverage ng immunization nila doon. They already have boosters, pero baka yun ang naiba. I'm not really sure. No? We have to study that. Ano ba talaga yung naiba?
But it's not a question of variants getting there ahead of our country. It's not necessarily a picture of pagka nandito yung mga bagong variant, ganyan din ang mangyayari.
I think yung pasok ng variant ng BA2 especially, or even Omicron, yung Omicron is not the BA2 yet, no? Mga December, January yan. Baka nauna tayo. Mas early nakapasok sa atin yan. And that affected our population. You saw the steep rise, no? And then later it was largely seen to be largely due to BA2. Baka lang, I'm not sure, no? We have to also check what happened there at ano ang kanilang variants na na-isolate, na sequence dito sa mga countries na to. Even for China and Hong Kong, I think nahuli sila. So tayo na medyo nadaanan na natin.
What about the...
Go ahead.
What about yung sa dami ng nag-Omicron, hindi ba safe to say na may natural immunity na yung mga yun? At sa dami nga ng tinamaan, lalo na sa NCR, no?
Yes.
Marami nagsabi na wag muna, tsaka lang tayo magpa-booster. Total, kaka-Omicron lang natin. Is that justifiable?
Okay. Kapag Omicron na BA1, and then you meet BA2, there are a few differences. No? We do not know how much that difference will affect the immune escape. We do not know that yet. But theoretically, so from basic immunologic principles, there should be some cross-reactivity between the two. So kung bababa man yung neutralizing antibodies because of sa BA2, konti lang yon. Yun ang ina-expect natin. So, hindi siya masyadong maapektuhan.
Okay.
Doctor, bakit sa South Korea malakas naman mag-masking ang mga tao? And even in China. bakit nagkakalat ngayon yung BA2? Saka sa New York, you had an Omicron surge. Ngayon, meron naman silang BA2 surge.
I really do not know how they use their masks or ano pa yung mga sobrang gathering, or medyo malamig din sa kanila. The viruses are able to live longer and more.
Baka yun, no? Winter.
Baka yun, dito sa,
Baka nag-spring.
may lamig dun sa atin medyo. Although, hindi naman din ganun siya
O baka masanay tayo sa mikrobyo.
Yun pa, talagang tibay ng mga...
Pero don't forget the surge na hanggang 39,000 per day nung mga February na ba yun?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, yeah. Ma'am, balikan ko lang yung second boosters kasi the last I read, at least nung late March, government was still considering or eyeing putting in a second booster shot. So it was still in that at that level. Is there already a policy decision to have the second booster shots at the very least for the special sectors like health
Will
workers
come out soon.
and
Baka bago mag-Holy Week, baka mag-Holy Week, or a little after Holy Week. Actually, alam ko, soon.
Approved na. What about yung redefinition ng fully vaccinated person?
That has to
Gagawin daw na kailangan boosted.
That has to be discussed pa po, no? Sorry na, syempre, maraming experts din ang kinoconsult. So, ano ba yung fully vaccinated dapat? Now, most of the vaccines we've had before, hindi itong COVID, would require 3 doses. Syempre, for COVID, kasi nasa pandemic tayo, yung data had to be gathered early and quickly, no? And then, nung nakita na yung 2 doses are sufficient, mataas na, nag-95% efficacy nga yung mga ibang vaccines, more than 80%, na-roll out siya. But note, after 3, 4, 5, 6 months, bumaba agad. So, hindi pa natin na-i-study long enough kung 2 doses ba talaga ang dapat primary or 3 doses. So, hindi pa tayo clear doon. At actually, we discussed that few months ago pa, and especially for some vaccines like Sinovac, Sinopharma, for which the WHO has recommendations for 3 doses as primary for certain individuals, especially yung elderly. So wala pa tayo do sa point na may decision tayo about that, although there are some data in other parts of the world or even from WHO.
And what about kids? You mentioned that kids don't need to take booster shots. Explain why that is. I thought that we were also intent on immunizing our children. But now you're saying, yan.
Yes. No, we were saying that before kasi the data for the children, so initially yung 12 to 17 and then yung 5 to 11, showed na very high yung kanilang immunity, yung immune response, mataas, higher than the older adults, no? Kaya lang, because of these variants nga, we also have to consider giving them boosters. Okay, let us take, for instance, Pfizer. Pfizer is recommended as 3 doses in the US for these children as primary. And they are given, tayo hindi. What we say,
Dalawa lang, diba?
2 doses lang ang primary. So there will be some recommendations to give the children 12 years and above also a booster.
Okay,
So
Dr.
kailangan din pala. Kala ko you said that.
But
hindi kailangan.
anyway,
Because of these variants especially.
Dr. Gloriani, we're almost out of time with this segment. Maybe just some final reminders for our friends, for our compatriots, mga kababayan natin, especially as we all head out. We will be gathering.
Holy Week, Easter.
Magkikita-kita talaga tayo at magkikita-kita tayo hanggang election pa. So some final reminders from you, ma'am.
Yes. Please continue to take care. Yung talagang masking, washing hands, lahat yan. All these minimum public health precautions and standards will have to be adhered to. So yung gathering, baka medyo mahirap nang i-avoid, no? Pero I've seen meetings now being held face-to-face and they are very careful. Nakamask ang mga tao properly and they have distancing and so on. So we can do that. We have to learn to live with the virus, no? Pero andyan pa yung ating utmost care. and the precautions. So, and get yourselves boosted, please.
Ma'am, if I can, let me just squeeze in one last. Kasi we've talked about this nung January pa na might be the end of the pandemic and all that. Pero hanggang ngayon, we're still wearing masks.
But
In secula secularum ba tayo nakamask? Forever and ever na to? O will
I
there come a
was-
time na we will drop it?
in some interviews, I already said I will mask forever na eh.
Forever?
Yes.
So may forever nga.
Because of those so many respiratory viruses lurking around, the mobility of people, borders are open, and so on. So, like the Japanese, like maybe the Koreans, before pre-COVID pa, they were wearing masks.
Yes,
So
ma'am, but
ako,
they wear masks pag meron silang sakit, not as an everyday behavioral trait.
No, to
No,
protect
they do.
themselves.
Lalo na sa Korea. Yeah.
To protect themselves also from
Mainly because of the pollution.
pollution,
Yeah.
and of course, pagka malamig, yung mga respiratory viruses are lurking around.
Wala naman tayong pollution dito.
Oh.
Marami tayong
Yeah,
pollution.
may mikrobyo nga tayo. Sanay.
Okay. Well, Dr. Gloriani, maraming salamat po. And have a
Thank you,
blessed
thank you.
Holy Week, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Ingat po.
You too. Thank
you,
you.
ma'am.
Bye.
Okay, Dr. Nina Gloriani, head of the vaccine expert panel. Please stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back.
Welcome back to the Chiefs here on One News, and now joining us is molecular biologist Father Nicanor Austriaco, who is also the research fellow of the Octa Research Group. Father, welcome back to the Chiefs. Good to see you again.
Good evening. Good evening to all of you.
Good evening,
from-
Father.
Welcome back.
Welcome back, Father. I suppose
Long
you're in the
time.
Philippines because normally when you're in the U.S., you have an ethereal glow of morning
No,
sun
I-
around
Very,
you.
I'm
Talaga
actually in the States. I will be back in the Philippines full time, actually. So I resigned my position here. So I
oh,
will
really?
I will move full time back to the Philippines in June.
Oh, you miss us that much, huh? Okay.
I miss you very much, and I realize there's much we can do together there.
Good
O,
answer,
tapusin
Father.
mo na yung vaccine mo, Father.
Father, I'm exercising self-restraint. I'm avoiding asking that as a first question. Yung yeast vaccine. Inuna pa ni Lucy.
Okay, sorry.
Idulo naman
Sorry
natin
to
ng konti
preempt.
yan. Idulo natin ng konti yan. Para,
Umpisaan na eh. Saan mo na?
sige na nga. Father, kamusta yeast vaccine natin dyan?
So the first animal trials is actually very promising. We were able to turn on the immune system of the mice, and so I'm actually presenting to the DOST this week to ask for money to continue to do the work. We already have developed vaccines against Wuhan, Alpha, Delta, and now Omicron BA.2. So we have vaccine candidates against all the variants. And I'm asking the national government, the Department of Science and Technology, to help us to test it in animals. But our first animal trials, which we got our results just a few weeks ago, are very promising because we did not even know if it would work as a vaccine in mice, and it does.
Father, after animal testing, pagka beer na yan, pwede na yan sa wag po.
Yes, Father. We are willing. We are willing candidates.
You are going to
Document ko yan, Ed.
volunteer.
Document ko.
Para sa bayan.
Exactly.
So Father, teka, so you're seeing good progress there. Can you give us, or is it too early to give us numbers? Like by how much yung increase ng immunity?
No. So what we know, what we can see now is in our small animal trials, we had basically 24 animals, and we divided the animals into different groups, those that received the vaccine and those that did not. And those that did not had no immune response after 1 month, but those who received it, we had substantial antibody development in the mice. And since mice, their immune system is very similar to us, we are hopeful. It's promising data that in principle, this vaccine candidate can also work in primates. So we will have to now we will have to repeat this data on mice, and we have so many variants. We have to test the variants, and then at that point, I have to figure out how the Philippines would like us to proceed. It's your previous guest is the chair of the vaccine expert panel, so I have to prepare data for her and her colleagues to examine our vaccine candidate to see whether or not it will be eligible for human clinical trials in the Philippines. So I'm familiar with the American system, so I have to familiarize myself with the Filipino system and get the data that the Philippine government will need to make sure that our candidate is safe for human trials.
Timetables, Father. Timetables. Do you have a timetable ready? By when you expect to roll it out?
I know. Again, hopefully by next year we will have some stronger animal data. Again, it's a matter of trying to work through the bureaucracy in the Philippines.
No, we haven't spoken to you for some time, and we know that you have been very optimistic about the trajectory of the pandemic. You said Omicron will herald the beginning of the end, but now we're seeing surges in China, even in New York. You still believe?
It's completely different. I do not anticipate any surge in the Philippines in the near future. The experiences of the countries that you have seen. So for example, in South Korea, where they are now coming down from a substantial surge, the difference, and in your previous guest attributed the lack of a surge and lack of community transmission to mass compliance in the Philippines. But South Korea probably has just as good, if not better, mass compliance than the Philippines. And they were seeing numbers of 100,000 per day. And so the primary difference, if you have to look at the differences, the first is that it was the BA.2 Omicron variant that was surging, and we already finished that. So that was the first thing. And second, South Korea was so good at preventing the previous variants from entering that in many ways they did not have substantial natural immunity.
Oh, okay.
So in the Philippines, we have both vaccinated immunity and we have natural immunity from the two previous surges. So a year ago, we had the Alpha Beta surge, and then we had, unfortunately, the tragic Delta surge in August. But the combination of those two builds up substantial natural immunity amongst the people. So you have hybrid immunity that's so strong, which is what you can see. Like, we have hundreds of thousands of our kababayans who are singing in rallies, and they're, jumping around without masks or with masks. But the masks, all these events, and these are substantial super spreader potentiality. There's nothing.
Yeah, but Father, just to explore another side to that. So you're saying that in South Korea, that was a legit surge. And our numbers right now is legitimately low as well. It is not a function, because I have seen that theory as well. It's not a function of more and better testing in South Korea and inefficient testing here in the Philippines.
So, their high numbers, 100,000 per day. We probably had something like that in January, but we did not have the testing to see those high numbers. But right now, you can tell that our low numbers are really low because the hospitalizations are also really low. And if the hospitalizations, if the testing was not able to see a surge, hospitals would see it because people would go to the hospital. And so the hospitalizations are also really low, so all the data suggests that the pandemic is really cool right now in the Philippines at all levels. It's not just a matter of we're not testing enough.
Okay.
The hospitals are so free, which we would not expect if.
Okay,
if
now, Father,
there was a lockdown surge.
now we do want to be careful about this, and I guess that's how I would frame this question. How do you spread that message, that insight, while at the same time still encouraging people to get their vaccination, get their boosters? Because frankly, what is also keeping people from getting their boosters is also now a lot of complacency and overconfidence.
Well, what the message has to be, and I say this all the time, is that we have substantial hybrid immunity, but that immunity is waning, and it's waning such that if we are not boosting, if we are not vaccinating, a time will come in the next few months where if a new variant emerges, we'll be vulnerable again, right? So right now we are relatively safe. We have high vaccine walls, but these walls are slowly dropping. And so we have to not think about what's happening now. We have to think about what's going to happen in the next few months, 6 months from now, what's going to happen. And so we have to always prepare. So it's not, we cannot be complacent because we can look around and we can say, things are very good right now. We have wonderful hybrid immunity, but that hybrid immunity, what we've discovered, is not permanent. And so we have to prepare for the future. And this is the time for us to be vaccinated. This is the time to be boosted because the risk of actually getting it is low. But in a few months, when that hybrid immunity begins to wane, we will be more vulnerable.
But when will this virus become endemic? You were the first one to actually say that we are approaching endemic phase. So we're now seeing very low numbers. Is that any indication that we're close to?
One of the things that we have to keep in mind is that the difference really between a pandemic and an endemic disease is really the state of public health emergency. So, we have billions of cases of the ordinary cold. It's endemic, it's billions of cases, but it's not a public health emergency. So now the question is whether or not COVID will remain a public health emergency as it has been for the last 2 years. And even here in the United States, there's strong pressure to declare the public health emergency to be over. And that once the public health emergency is over, even though there are cases, remember there are 25,000 cases of COVID in the States yesterday or so, those numbers, 25,000 compared to the Philippines 250, the United States is saying we will be happy with 20,000 cases of COVID every day. This will be endemic for us. So you see, endemic really is about it's not just a medical phenomenon, it is also a public policy judgment as to what levels of COVID the country is able to sustain over the long term without having it overwhelm the hospitals. And Dr. Gloriani was speaking about wearing masks for the foreseeable future. We've not had a mask mandate here now for months, and so part of it is a balance. So they have chosen to remove all the masks, all the pandemic restrictions, and they're happy with 20,000 cases because we have a superb health infrastructure here in the United States. Sadly, as we were talking about during the break, a quarter of the United States is still unvaccinated. So we are still seeing a lot of deaths because unvaccinated people are still dying from Omicron. So in the Philippines, we are entering election season, it's transition. I will go to the consulate in 3 weeks to vote for president of the Philippines. So I'm excited to go vote for the first time in New York City for the Philippine election. So it will really be the next government that is going to have to decide, what level of COVID we will be able to tolerate as a society, and then to establish policies to keep COVID at this level.
Sir, let me ask you, Father, let me ask you the same question I asked Dr. Gloriani a while ago. Will there ever come a time when we will no longer need to mask up? When we can, hug other people, kiss other people in a platonic way, of course, and simply touch people like we used to do.
Or even just shake hands.
Yeah, or shake hands. Because the Spanish flu was a big deal for its time, but eventually people moved on and things returned to normal. Will we ever get back there?
I think what you're going to see is what we see here in the United States. The mandates will be dropped and vulnerable people will continue to mask, right? So the idea is that vulnerable people will continue to mask, but the population itself will be able to return to a pre-COVID normal, where we will be able to be physical and emotionally engaged as we were before. One of the things we must keep in mind is that there are costs to mask wearing, right? So we assume that if the entire population will wear masks for the next 20 years, that there will be no cost. But especially for Filipinos, we read each other's faces.
Yes.
So much of Filipino communication is our face. So the obscuring of the face makes it difficult for us to communicate as effectively as we normally can. So we have to balance this out, which is why I'm hoping that this year we will be able to drop the mask mandate in the Philippines, allow people who are vulnerable and who are at higher risk or who simply maybe have a lower tolerance for COVID to wear masks. There is clear evidence here that if you are vaccinated and boosted and you wear a mask, that is enough to protect you regardless of whether or not everyone else is masking. This is called the single mask policy. So right now we have a mandatory, everyone wears a mask in the Philippines, but I think we have to teach our kababayans that if you are vaccinated, if you are boosted, and if you wear a mask, those three together will protect you regardless of who is masking elsewhere, regardless. And so this is where we will move to, I hope, very soon.
I-acknowledge ko lang yung point yan. Sharing lang to because I remember I was talking to a diplomat. She had arrived in the country in the middle of the pandemic. And sabi ko, actually, you're not seeing us at our natural state because culturally, of all the countries you've seen, the Filipinos are really malambing, we're even touchy-feely, and so on. And now for 2 years, I haven't even kissed my mother, or I even hugged my mother. So I guess that's the point ni Ed, di ba? Culturally, what changes in us as well in the long term?
When you give directions, doon,
well, and the danger is we will not be able to teach our children how to be as Filipino as we are. You see, this is the risk we take is the longer we keep these mask mandates on and the longer we restrain our natural Filipino affection, the harder it will be for younger children who have to learn how to be Filipino.
Yes,
and to see it, with their lolos and lolas, with titos and titas. we teach each other how to be affectionate. And even here I was with a family the other day, and the children are so hesitant to touch anybody. And so the parents were saying we're still teaching them to go back to being pre-COVID, because after 2 years, they're so scared and jittery around people, and so it takes time.
Yeah. Father, let me just
Nawawala
before we
na
drop
yung
that.
mano. Oo nga.
Before we drop that, let me just ask this. Just to qualify, are you saying you're confident that we can drop the mask policy within the year, or you're hoping that we can drop the mask policy within the year? Those are two different things. As a scientist, are you do you see that possibility within the year, or is it just?
I think the way I would say it is, I am optimistic that we will be able to drop the mask mandate in the Philippines without risking a surge by the end of this year, unless a new variant arrives. I think that's the clear. So given the situation that we have now, I believe that the hybrid immunity will be substantial enough to protect us even in the absence of mask mandate. Remember, absence of mask mandate does not mean people are not wearing masks. It just means that the people who need to wear masks are wearing masks,
Yeah, the
and
special
those
sectors.
who are not are not.
Dropping
Going
the
back to vaccines, does this mean that we will continue to booster?
Yeah.
I mean, is this going to be a lifetime thing?
No, because the data in Israel is already showing that the second booster, so the fourth shot, only lasts for about 8 weeks. So unless we want to be boosting every 2 months, which is impossible logistically in a country as large as ours, what we have to do is we just have to, again, we have to realize, as Dr. Gloriani pointed out, that we have to live with the virus. That means that for most of us, who are healthy and who are young, we will have to get used to getting COVID once or twice a year. But it will be Omicron COVID, it will be mild COVID. And so every time we get it, we will just be boosting our immunity naturally without getting a shot. So I think, I know that there are countries around the world that are moving in that direction. In Iceland, they completely removed everything, and they're saying, if you get COVID, get COVID. It will just boost our hybrid immunity. I never want to encourage people getting sick. I think getting sick is something we should always avoid. But I think the reality is that since COVID is here to stay forever, we have to settle into the possibility and the likelihood that we will be getting COVID on a regular basis, just like we get the flu or a cold.
The first boost will still be needed, Father, before we can drop the masking within the year. Is that right?
So again, so this is a policy statement. So the science basically shows that once you get boosted, the boosting only lasts a few months, 6 months. Now, and this is why, because we are going to have to rely on what is called the T-cell immunity. So the T-cell immunity is the tanks of your body, while the antibodies is like the missiles. So we know that the missiles go up and down every time you get boosted, but it looks that there's data that the tanks are there to stay, which is why even if you are, it's been a while since you got vaccinated and boosted, you are still protected substantially against severe disease and death. So again, as long as it's Omicron BA.2, which is relatively mild for those of us who have protection from the past, we'll be okay.
Okay, if I got the alpha, which I did last year, the alpha infection, do I still have immunity from that up to now?
Well, you have alpha, but you also got vaccinated and boosted, right? So it's not just alpha, you have substantial exposure to everything. And what we know is that the booster shot especially seems to make your body more, it allows your body to develop antibodies against a wider range of variants, which is why that was very hopeful. So like I said, I mean, you're seeing this now, it's an incredibly calm time, and this is probably as low as it's going to get. I mean, if you look at the number of flu cases in the Philippines, it's about comparable. During flu season, 200 a day in the entire country, it's comparable. So this is the endemic stage in a sense. The question now is whether or not, how we are going to sustain this forever.
Right?
Okay. Father Nick Austriaco of
Always good to
Octa
have you,
Research.
Father.
Always good to have you, sir. Maraming
Yes.
God
salamat
bless
po.
you. Happy Holy Week.
Happy Holy
Happy
Blessed Holy Week
Easter.
to you.
And happy Easter to you.
Thank you.
And that will be all for this edition of the Chiefs. We hope what was discussed here will keep the conversation going. Before we go, a reminder to our viewers, mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines. I'm Robbie Alampay.
I'm Ami Paminton of the Philippine Star.
I'm Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5.
I'm Ed Lingao, and we are One News.